very good evening and welcome to my show. I am Syed Zarir Hussain and I have with me a very interesting personality. He had been principal advisor to the Government of India Finance Department, Money Ministry. He is now member, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, a very well-known historian, best-selling author, and one of India's best-known economists, I would say internationally acclaimed economist. Welcome to my show, Sanjeev Sanyal.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be on your show.
Actually, you came for a conclave, Act East through Northeast. But for the people of the Northeast, we have been hearing this. Initially, it was Look East, and then it shifted to Act East. But is it just a phrase, or it's something that is a forward movement somewhere?
So it's something we take very seriously. As I mentioned in my talk yesterday, we have many links with Southeast Asia. They go back thousands of years through migration of people, through goods, trade and exchange of ideas of all kinds, and cultural ideas as well. So it's not something new. However, through the colonial experience and then consequently the Cold War, there was a disruption of this direct contact between these two parts of the world. They have now slowly been re-established over the last decade or so. But I think what we need to do here is to move away from what is now essentially a maritime linkages, largely with South and Eastern India, and begin to extend it into the Northeast, which is somewhat more landlocked. Now, there are several things that need to be done for this. So, just like when we looked east for the rest of the country, particularly Peninsular India, we had to first have the intellectual and emotional connect. I think that is getting established, while we are doing a couple of other things. One is getting the physical infrastructure in place. Now, we can talk all we want, but unless you've got the highways, the bridges, the train lines, the airports, there is no point in having this conversation at all. And you will have seen that at least within India, there's been a dramatic increase in the amount of physical infrastructure that's been put together. The connectivity, yes. So unless we are connected internally, forget about connecting with the rest of the world. So this connectivity is getting done. Finally, places like Manipur, for example, are getting connected by the train. There are 15 functioning airports in the Northeast. I believe a 16th is coming up. And some of these can eventually become international airports. We are building to that quality. So this is the first and most important step. The second thing that has also happened simultaneously is, of course, the establishment of peace. This was a very insurgency-prone area, as you remember. Many of us are old enough to have witnessed it firsthand. This is now no longer a problem for the region as a whole. Of course, there are enclaves of problems, but that's true for every part of the world. That has meant that the Special Powers Act is by and large been removed for most of the Northeast. It will continue to be removed. And that also means one prerequisite for establishment of trade, commerce, etc. is getting put in place, which is simply law and order and peace. Now comes the third aspect, which is linking it through to other places. So this is the context in which this ASEAN Summit is being held here in Guwahati. We are bringing people from the rest of the world. Come and see the place, first of all. First, before you create any other kind of connect, come and see the place. Maybe they can establish consulates here so that visas can be given. Similarly, on our side, whatever needs to be done from the central government side, let me assure we will do that, whether it's, creating the ambience for creating international airports in more than one location, and of course the land borders. Then of course there is the physical infrastructure that we need, for example, for trade. There's been for a long time talk about opening through to Chittagong, opening through to Myanmar, through the land border towards Mandalay, but also towards one of its ports along the Bay of Bengal. So all of those are now getting done. But remember, none of this was meaningful as a serious conversation till we had our internal infrastructure in place and peace, both of which have been established.
So that means, in other words, if this peace definitely a vital component, and this is an advantage when you talk about the Act East policy if it materializes?
Absolutely. We are very serious about it. Otherwise, I personally wouldn't be here. Prime Minister Modi is very, very keen on this effort. And of course, we have a department now in Assam at least, which is dedicated to this effort.
So do you think that if this really happens, if there are the linkages between the Northeast and the other Southeast Asian countries in terms of airports, air connectivity, or in terms of land routes, so do you think the overall economic condition in the Northeast will simply soar and it will be an upswing?
Absolutely. I mean, you're already seeing that. I mean, Assam is perhaps not the one that is the worst affected by lack of connectivity. Some of the other states are even worse. And say, for example, Manipur used to regularly get blockaded. And it used to happen because of insurgency and also because of, landslides, rain, all kinds of other things. Now, imagine you can just drive through to those parts of the country through Chittagong and Myanmar. It completely opens these places up.
So there are thoughts like, when we talk with people, they sometimes say that if there is this real actist begins, then what happens is that the Northeast will have to no longer depend on doles from New Delhi. They can survive and sustain on their own.
Absolutely. And there are two parts to this. One of them is simply, of course, you get more resources because you're generating it yourself. But importantly, as with any society, being Atmanirbhar is an important part. So because you're generating the resources yourself, there is a certain pride to it that is very important for any society. I think that pride needs to be inculcated. Of course, a GST system helps as well because now you have an even playing field across the country. But I think there are several things that can now connect through. We all know that this part of the country is very beautiful, right? We all say that, tourism should be there. But you cannot have tourism until, again, infrastructure and peace. Now we have that. That is no longer an excuse. So you would have seen just 2 years ago, we had talked about, for example, developing iconic sites like Shiv Sagar, for example, or Loktak Lake. Now, thanks to COVID, we couldn't do very much about it for the last 2 years. Well, that is how it is. But we are very serious about following this through. And so what we will do is, one of the things we wanted to do by coming here on this is first tell us what is it that the state government needs from the central government. Are there things you need, rules changed, some infrastructure support? But a lot of it is really, exchange of ideas, getting people to begin coming, and then it gets a momentum of its own. And so we really hope that with this, a new era is being built up.
And for that, the regional governments in the Northeast also must take a proactive kind of a measure so as to take advantage of the whole scenario, isn't it?
Absolutely. And here, in the end, remember, all political systems, and particularly democratic ones, eventually react and respond to what young people want. And let me say, this is happening across the country, but it's happening in Northeast as well. There was a time, till very recently, where young people basically aspired for civil service type jobs. This is changing everywhere, but it is now filtering through even to Northeast. Young boys, girls, what do they aspire to be? They want to be entrepreneurs, they want to be athletes, they want to be writers, they want to do things that are value adding as opposed to value extracting. And this is a huge change in mental imagery that has happened very recently. And there also, notice if you go to the rest of India, one of the things that you'll really see is the large number of young men and women from the Northeast working in the hospitality industry. I mean, if you go to the middle rung and lower rung of any major 5-star hotel anywhere in the country, there are young men and women from the Northeast working there, particularly from Assam, Manipur, Nagaland, also from the others as well. Now, what does that mean? That means there is a talent pool being built up. Some of this talent pool can be sucked back in with greatest of ease. It just requires now to get to the next stage and begin leveraging this.
And when you talked about tourism, you say Northeast is beautiful.
Yes.
So when we have connectivity and other stuff, so apart from tourism, do you think that people say that medical tourism could be one of the
Yes.
things. Then Northeast being a sports hub, because you have produced a lot of talent. So this could be a training ground for sports personalities from adjoining, from our neighborhood, immediate neighborhood.
Absolutely.
So these are areas that can be really discussed,
Yes,
isn't it?
so a sports university, I think, is being built near Imphal.
Yes.
So that is a good step. But there are other states can be doing other things, and I think, you see, once you get into a positive culture, then many things begin to fall in place. So I, for example, think that Assam had a major tradition of boat racing. After all, this is the
Yes.
land of Lasit Borpukon,
Yes.
and he won his battle on the river.
Yes.
So just like, for example, you have boat racing in Kerala.
Kerala.
I don't see why we shouldn't, celebrate, Sarai Ghat Day, let's say, with a boat race between different districts. Even other states can participate. I'm just saying that we need to go back to a positive view of celebrating the culture of this area beyond, Sarkari events shown on, some Sarkari type channel. We need to begin to celebrate and innovate on all kinds of new things that can be brought out from this culture. Similarly, we can do with food. The extraordinary variety of
Yes.
cuisines in this part of the world. So, when the rest of the world thinks of Indian food, it's the same Mughlai or tandoori tikka type food. Now, nothing against it.
Yes.
I myself enjoy
Yeah.
eating it, but I mean, the extraordinary food of Assam. I mean, the and served in style on a
Bell metal.
Plate and done in style. And this is, by the way, all the states have some interesting foods. Many of the tribal communities have some very, very interesting
Absolutely.
herbs and food. And this, by the way, fits through to the concept we were discussing earlier about health as well. So there are many interesting things we need to do. But that requires an imaginative effort that has to be mostly bottom up. And that's why I went back to the earlier point that ultimately you cannot run this by central government grants.
Absolutely.
Or even state government grants. It has to be a indigenously driven bottom-up
That is
energy.
where the Atmanirbhar, that mantra of Modi
Yes.
comes into play, isn't it?
Yes. So it is very important that you have this positive energy and this pride is directed towards building on all of these things. So, for example, the Shatra traditions of Majuli, or even there are this entire area has so many Shakti Peeths that can be built. Of course, everybody knows about Kaziranga, but as it happens to be, there are so many national parks. Why just Kaziranga? In fact, I would argue that we are over exploiting Kaziranga. Should maybe Manas and many others. There are states.
In other words, what you are saying is that we can exploit our resources,
Absolutely.
our whatever
in a renewable way,
and with an innovative ideas.
Yes.
Bring in innovative ideas, exploit what we have, and make it a better place or
Yes.
economically more vibrant.
All development this is all development is about. There's nothing very deep about development. Most countries in the world manage to do it. Other parts of India are also able to do it. The point is to do it in a way that is sustainable, i.e. we are not destroying that resource. So obviously if you overexploit a natural landscape, then you lose it. So anywhere we go, we need to do that. Of course, given the geography of this part of the country, Assam plays a very important role in that. In a sense, Assam is the only state that shares a border with all the other states. So consequently, Assam, in terms of connectivity and in terms of just keeping this machine running, is a very important part of that story.
At this apart, just coming
Yes.
back to the Northeast,
Yes.
We do not have too many industries here. And people say that this region is not viable or economically it's not feasible. These are some of the things being mentioned, oft-repeated kind of, it may sound very cliched, but this is what is being
So,
heard. So what is your prescription? That do you think only big industries can really help in boosting the region's economy?
So first of all, I think we have to realize that even if you want to industrialize, you are not industrializing in the smokestack era of industrialization. Whatever industrialization now happens is not, of course you need some heavy steel and those kinds of industries, but the Northeast needn't be the place where we want to do that kind of industry. It's ecologically fragile. But on the other hand, most top-end industries or cutting-edge industries are not requiring that kind of heavy factories and so on that we imagine what industrialization was. So the next generation of industry is much more disaggregated, much smaller, lighter in many ways, but they can still be very cutting edge, whether it's 3D printing or, by the way, when we talk of industry, remember that much of the value addition of an industry actually happens in the services end of it. So manufacturing something has actually become increasingly the trivial part of any industry. It's the design, it's the putting together of a product that matters, and that doesn't require you necessarily to build huge heavy factories. What you need, for example, is you can look into back office outsourcing. That requires 5G, and we are going to roll out 5G across the country, including in the Northeast. But it does require some kind of connectivity. So that's why the airports are important. Similarly, if you're going into certain kinds of packaged goods, herbs and so on, these are not massive industries in the way, say, a petrochemical plant. Although, as it happens to be, Northeast also is one of the few parts of the country you do have gas and oil. So that too needs to be developed. But other than that, there are all kinds of things. Whether it's, for example, agar wood is a major industry here. It's high value addition. Much of its raw material has to be grown, so it's an ecologically friendly thing, and it doesn't require big factories in that sense.
I see the biggest problem in the Northeast, unemployment problem. And many people say that it is due to the lack of industries. So I just want, from your perspective, how do we solve this problem of unemployment? Because it's growing by the day in the Northeast.
So this is of course, given our demographics, this is an issue across the country.
Yes.
It's a particular problem for Northeast because, as you pointed out yourself, this has historically been
slightly
alienated and behind the curve. Now, there is a golden opportunity here, and that is why we are putting in so much effort from the central government side and putting the infrastructure together. So there shouldn't be any excuse that we can't put up an industry or something here because, this connectivity is not there. That, I think, in large parts of the Northeast is either already solved or will get solved because already the construction or whatever is happening in that space. Two, as I mentioned, we did require, peace. That has also by and large been established. So now comes the issue of making sure the financing is available, connectivity in terms of, emotional connectivity is there. And of course, ideas, etc. have to be allowed to flourish. And there a big effort is by bringing people from outside just to see the place.
And when you consider the economy of whole of India and put Northeast in another bracket, it's slightly lopsided. So what could be the primary reason, or what could be the road ahead?
So why is the Northeast sort of cut off? I mean, just look at a map and you can see.
Geolocation.
It's the geolocation. It doesn't require great imagination to know why this is the case. We did go through a partition, and then, and that left Northeast being stuck, barely connected through a chicken neck. Now, the geopolitics of the region has developed in a different way. Now, it is much easier today to connect through to, say, Bangladesh or to Myanmar and so on. And so, though, that infrastructure has to be built. So, and by the way, some of it has already got built. I think in many places, the last miles need to now be connected.
Yes.
So, I think one of the problems with building big infrastructure is that till it's all done, nothing seems to be moving, but it is getting done. So even on the road to Mandalay, There are, I think, some bits near Moreh, etc., which is not done. But I think on the Myanmar side, a lot of it has got done, and even on our side, a lot of it is done. The internal connection not done. Same thing, connectivity right through to Chittagong, etc. A lot of it has got done. I think by 2024 we should. These things
do you
should
think
be done.
there is a changed perception in government policy from what we had seen in the UPA and the Modi government in terms of the Northeast?
Well, I won't comment on it as politically. I would just say that it has evolved over time. Certainly, there was an earlier sort of view that letting the rest of the world into the Northeast was somehow a bad thing. And we used to have all these kinds of restrictions, inner line permits, barriers, because somehow the thinking of that time was you had to protect these areas, and that protection had to be done by closing the doors. By the way, this was not just true of Northeast. We had that view generally of India, which is why we had these, import substitution worldview. Now, so if in an import substitution worldview, basically the idea is if something needs protection, you need walls. If it needs more protection, you need even higher walls. So if Northeast needs more protection, you need ever more restrictions. We have completely changed our view on this in recent times, as you know, as we have gone, and that the best way to actually protect something is to let it grow. And so whether you see, for example, in Ladakh, many more tourists are coming. There is Indians are going there as tourists, and an emotional connect has been built. So same thing will happen here. After all, a lot of Northeast kids now study in Delhi.
Yes.
Right? Now, I'm sure back in the 70s and 80s, when they first turned up and began studying there was a lot of friction because, they were somewhat different looking, the language, the accent was different or whatever. Over time, it has got naturalized to such an extent that nobody blinks at people from the Northeast and Delhi. And the same thing will happen on the other side. You see, people will come, people will intermarry, they will get jobs with each other, they'll make friends with each other, they'll go out to play football together. And after a while, you just build up links which are personal, and that's how any country or the world as a whole needs to build linkages.
So in terms of, say, economic boom in the Northeast or building up infrastructure, it's all the more important because we are strategically located. We are straddled China, Myanmar, Bangladesh, all this. Some of them are friendly countries, some of them are not too friendly. But then this is so very important, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think some cases like in China, there is not very much we can do. For two reasons. One is the linkages in that direction are simply geologically difficult because of the mountains and so on. And of course, there is a complicated relationship with China with their claims on Arunachal and so on. And of course, the history, the longer history as well, 1962 war and so on. So that's a complicated direction. But in the other directions, these linkages are both easier to do physically and also in many ways emotionally. So we have good relations with some of these other countries. We should exploit them. And by the way, I mentioned we have just mentioned Bangladesh and Myanmar, but actually we have borders or near borders with places like Bhutan, Nepal, and so on, which are also in the general area. So I think these linkages need to be built. And as I said, one part of it is, of course, simply the physical infrastructure of it.
Before going into the the Indian economy, I understand you love rewriting history. So when we talk about history in our part of the world, in the Northeast, what are the things that come to your mind in terms of history? You have already mentioned about Lachit Borphukan, you have mentioned about Sarai Ghat. So because see, just to bring it into context, Assam politics, you are aware, is based on the issue of citizenship.
Yes.
Right?
So it's an important part of actually understanding history, is an important part of understanding who we are. Unfortunately, for reasons that one can debate at length, but the fact of the matter is the history that we are taught in schools and other things has ended up being the history of Delhi. So we learn about obscure dynasties like the Lodhis, for example, But you will not hear about, for example, the Ahoms
Yes.
at all, who are here for 600 years. Or even the earlier history of Pragjyotishpur, Kamrup, etc. I mean, not many people know about great kings like Raja Prithu and so on. So we need to bring that in. And by the way, this is a point I've been making for quite some time, that do not confuse India's history with the history of Delhi. And this is particularly true when you have lots of small states. Let's walk away from Northeast for a while. What about Sikkim, right? What about the history of Goa? It's a very interesting history,
Yes,
by the way.
yes.
The only time Odisha ever turns up in our history books is when Ashoka turned up there and carried out a massacre. So that's the one and only time that you hear of Odisha. It's a huge state. So think of what
Yes.
do poor Northeast is simply
Yes.
left out of the
Left
story.
out of the history
But
books.
ironically, they have a very interesting history. I'm currently writing, by the way, my next book will be a history of the revolutionary movement and its contribution to India's freedom struggle. Now, in that context, I am writing a section on the INA.
Okay.
And the extraordinary linkages that the INA had, for example, with the northeast of India, because that's the only part of India in the mainland that the INA managed to reach is the northeast, and this is where the battles happen. And the major events of this happened at a place called Moirang. Again,
Where is the famous statue there?
Yes, and the only place in India on the mainland, of course, Andamans also they did, but only place in India where the INA flag was put up. And there were amazing number of local Manipuri who helped them. Who are these people? What are their names? People simply have forgotten about these characters like Nilamani Singh and so on. So I want to bring some of these characters back into the history, the conversation of our understanding of our history. And the fact of the matter is, just because of partition, it sort of has got stuck there. But historically, it was all free flowing.
That means in our school books, these things must
absolutely
figure.
This must figure. In fact, as a Bengali, I find it most annoying that the only time Bengal is mentioned in our history books is when we lose Battle of Plassey. Otherwise, we are not there.
Yes.
And then even 1971 war, which we won, is not mentioned properly in our books. I mean, this is crazy. So I think this Delhi-centric history I have been arguing against for a long time. Here you can kindly join forces with the rest of the country against Delhi. As a Bengali, we have a problem. That the Tamils and Malayalis have a problem. The Rajasthanis have a problem. The Himachalis have a problem. The Ladakhis also have a problem. I think all of us now need to stand up to this. Join hands against this Delhi-centric history. The good news is that the Prime Minister Modi himself agrees with this point, and he has mentioned this in other times in his speeches. And I think the time has come to begin doing that. But let me say, there is a little bit of help I need from the intellectual classes of the Northeast. I have been trying to collect histories of, it could even be oral histories of the Northeast, of the people of the Northeast. And I must say, with the one exception of the Manipuri, the rest of Northeast is quite poor at least English translations of their history. So you will get, some odd bit here
Bits
on the
and pieces,
Ahoms. Yeah, you'll hear about the Ahoms or something that the British had written. After that, I'm sorry, it has not been comprehensively recorded and the thing. So a big effort needs to be made. For example, Meghalaya, a very interesting history of the Jayantiya kings. Even when you go to Meghalaya and you ask for a recounting of this history, you find that very, very few people are able to recount this very interesting history.
That means the oral history or written history in the local dialect needs to be...
First of all, it needs to be documented. First, a serious document. And here it's important that a serious documentation effort, not just, it shouldn't be hagiographic.
Yeah, it shouldn't be piecemeal effort.
It's not piecemeal, and we don't want a hagiographic effort. One of the problems in India is when somebody is given the job of doing it, they don't record the facts. They record it as they think the story should be told. So opinion is important, but first just record the raw facts. Then, of course, all history writing is an interpretation, but let us at least get the facts straight in a what should I say, non-emotional kind of way. Otherwise, what will happen? You'll spend all your time debating, which tribe won which battle against whom. So what is the evidence of that? Just put it down in one piece of paper.
Interesting. History would be a different kind of a session altogether.
Yes.
But then we are constrained. Time constraints, time limits are there. So I'll have to move to my last segment, that is Indian economy.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister completed 2 days back 8th year in office.
Yes.
And the biggest challenge that we see is the economy, the challenges and the prospects. There is world recession, global recession is there. Then you have the growing inflation. So how do you sum it up?
So the last 8 years were very important year in many ways. Some very painful reforms that we needed to do at some point in our history got done. And whenever we did it, it was going to be painful. So we put in place an inflation targeting framework. We cleaned up our banking system. We introduced an insolvency and bankruptcy system. We introduced the GST. All of these are painful things to do. Any country that has attempted to do this, and we did it all simultaneously. So the good news is that the economy got cleaned up in many ways. In the old days, you would have had a lot of the load of lots of inefficient companies being carried along. But here now we routinely even shut down large companies like Jet Airways. We have shut down, we sold off SR Steel and so on. So there is a system of cleaning up that has happened. The banks are in fairly good health. The financial markets are in reasonable health. Of course, they go up and down. That's part of the game. So many of the painful reforms that we needed to do are done. There's still some more to do, but many of these painful ones got done. The problem, of course, was as they got finished off, we were hit by 2 years of COVID. We are aware that when we did things like lockdowns, it's painful to the economy. Be under no illusion that the economic managers did not know that if you shut down and have a lockdown, you'll have a significant decline in GDP growth. That's obvious. But we had to do it for health reasons. The good news is that the economy, the supply side of the economy, survived these 2 years rather well. So when we opened things up, economy did come back quite well. So we didn't face, for example, there are many countries like, say, Sri Lanka, where it got so badly disrupted, even when things got opened up, it couldn't take the pressure. So that is not where we are at. I would say, if you look worldwide, we are one of the countries that managed to come out of this reasonably well without loading up too much. We did load up some debt to GDP ratio. That's inevitable because we had to do fiscal spending of various kinds. But even there, it's within manageable limits. But here comes the tricky part. As we came out of this, we were hit by this new problem of inflation, particularly of energy prices, but also of some other things like chip shortages for cars and things like that as well. Now, this is very difficult for us because there is very little we can do internally to try and solve this problem because we are an energy importing country. While in the medium term, in the case of chips, we may be able to produce some chips, but the fact of the matter is right now, we have to import it. So at this juncture, this is something that we have to manage along the way. We are trying to do the best we can. Some of it is simply by tightening up liquidity on the monetary side, which of course everything comes with a consequence. One of them is that interest rates rise, but that's how it is. And of course, we have, at least from the central government side, reduced taxes on fuel. Some of it is hopefully filtering through to other prices as well. So that is how we are managing it. Are we happy about this global inflationary pressure? No. What can we do about it? Well, we can do some of it by dampening it. But let's be very clear, some part of it will feed through. And even that which does not feed through because we have done other things, there is a price we pay for it in terms of revenues that we are going to lose and so on. So be clear, we will try our best, but at every stage there is a trade-off we are making in order to do that. Now, of course, this particular surge in energy prices is happening at least in part because of a specific geopolitical event in Eastern Europe, which is the war in Ukraine. I have no way of guessing how that is going to turn out, but if it kind of resolves itself in some way, and I don't know how it would be, and energy prices do come back, then that would remove one very important pressure point in our economy right now, because with the exception of this inflation pressure, I would argue that we are now in a situation where we can really press the accelerator on the economy.
So in what I could sense from you is that we will emerge stronger in the days ahead.
Absolutely. We are actually, this economy, according to even the April assessment of IMF, we were going to grow at over 8%. And that would make us by some margin the fastest growing economy in the world. Now, even with all this pressure, our economy will slow a little bit maybe, but everybody else is going to slow. We'll still remain the world's fastest growing economy, both this year and probably next year. But of course, we can grow faster if you remove this inflation constraint, because the supply side of the economy, you see, the painful part of doing these reforms, which I mentioned, the GST, all of them are there. Now, you can always keep tinkering and improving them. But the fact is, we now have a tax system that is capable of capturing revenue if the economy grows. So, if we grow the economy, it captures the revenue. Earlier, the problem was that you grew the economy, but just because the system couldn't capture the revenue, we couldn't then back it up with the next round of spending and so on, and then the system would slow down. Now is, you grow the economy, we get the revenues, we can then pile it back into, infrastructure or even reducing taxes where it's possible. And so you get into a virtuous cycle. We are now in a position to do that for most things. And so we really need, what should I say? We need, to use a driving analogy, if we are able to get a clear highway, this economy is now capable of high speed. You just need to press the accelerator. With this one problem, the key hurdle being inflation.
So high speed, 5G speed we need.
Yes.
And on that very positive note, thank you very much, Sanjeev Sanyal, for being with us. You spoke from the Act East to Northeast to Indian economy, and we hope it moves on the fast lane, and hope India and the people will get benefits out of it. Thank you once again, Sanjeev Sanyal, for being with me.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Very good night, and see you next time.